Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming. My name is Luisa, and I'm the producer and director of the Land of Opportunity project. And this is Ada McMahon, my amazing producer, who's going to be presenting with me today. So Land of Opportunity is a project that's been ongoing for almost 8 years now. Wow, I always want to say 7, but it's actually almost 8. And it's had many different iterations. It started out when I relocated down to New Orleans. I'm from New York, but I moved down to New Orleans to start documenting the rebuilding process post-Katrina, and stayed there full time, and I'm still there, documenting a lot of different stories and a lot of different processes that were happening post-Katrina. Released a feature film called Land of Opportunity in 2011 that followed 8 different stories of rebuilding over a 5-year period. One of the producers of the film, Evan Casper Futterman, is here. And along the way, was also working a lot on shorter pieces in conjunction with people on the ground who are working on issues related to post-Katrina rebuilding, and sort of figuring out how to distribute those pieces online and what was more suitable for advocacy campaigns and more suitable for educational purposes, and kind of exploring moving beyond the kind of limitations of a feature film and sort of that linear format. And then for the past 2 years have been working on the Land of Opportunity interactive platform, which is what we're going to talk about today. We've taken the story of post-Katrina New Orleans and really expanded it out to talk about what it means to rebuild a community post-crisis, what are the factors and forces and issues that are going on. And we're working in 5 communities right now: New Orleans, New York, Detroit, Chicago, and Boston. We're telling stories from those 5 cities, and also from the Gulf Coast, in non-urban environments in the Gulf Coast. And several of our partners that are working with us on content from the platform are here tonight, and will be speaking to that experience. So we're going to show you the trailer first to give you an idea, kind of an overview of the project, and then dive a little deeper into different pieces of content and sort of our process.
One begin to tell of the end when somewhere in the middle truth lies belly up in the gutter, dingy and still.
Yes, we want to return to the lower Ninth Ward. We fight for not just rebuilding, we fight for the rights of residents to return.
It's a continued injustice to allow them to move back and to reinvest their, in some cases, very modest savings and their energies back into another disaster.
And on day 46, a member of our community was out with his boat, and it came rolling into the bay. I mean, tons of it. Just thick, orange. You know, it was horrible. It just came in.
The health symptoms that are occurring right now and have occurred since right after the spill are severe headaches, nausea, respiratory problems, burning eyes, burning nose.
We have the Sheraton Hotel on Duffield Street. Who thought about the Sheraton Hotel coming to Duffield Street? Are you kidding me?
I was scared to death. I had to go on the 7th floor, and all the cars was covered with water.
This is where the water basically was, right here. But you can see how high the water actually got.
on the trailer. The kind of core idea behind the site, and of course the functionality of the site, is this idea of annotating video and using video or audio or really anything that has a time code as your primary entry into a story, and then layering strategically curated multimedia content that can take pretty much any form into that video or that piece of audio to begin to construct a story that can sort of toggle between the personal, emotionally driven storytelling that we all do really well as social justice filmmakers, with a larger issue framework and more content and more information that allows people to dig deeper and dive deeper into the story that's being told. And it also involves what I've been calling vertical storytelling, which we'll talk a little bit more when we talk a little bit more about our process and kind of how it's been, at least for me, changing the way that I think about scripting and constructing stories. So the first piece we're going to kind of dive into is a piece called How Does One Begin that features this amazing slam poet based in New Orleans, Sonny Patterson, and Ada's going to take us through that. What we call a rich media video.
One begin to tell of the end when somewhere in the middle truth lies belly up in the gutter, dingy and still, stained with poverty, the type no detergent can get out of nowhere. She said water ran up the street, asked if I had ever seen something you normally only hear about, and now her house is home to nothing and no one except the memories she remembers as she stands atop broken bunk beds and shards of glass that encase the only picture she ever had of her mother and father together. She remembers happy here before the rain came, before the flood of filth filled their eyes, circus-like, she said. They think we are fools, when really they are the clowns. Step right up, hurry, hurry, for little or nothing you can see the best of the worst. First come, first served. This is destruction at its finest. Death has never looked so sweet, and if you give them a treat, I guarantee they'll smile wide. Just hold on tight and watch your purse. We couldn't get rid of all the poor folks. I know, we'll get over this hump. You'll see New Orleans will be a great theme park, even better than Vegas, and certainly Disney. No worries, there's a bunch of developers to assist me. Meanwhile, privatization is taking over public housing, mixed income facility, kick them out by the thousands. Every place we've torn down can look like River Gardens. Wouldn't you prefer that over the old St. Thomas? We want to see our homes rebuilt. Be still, be patient. It takes time to build these neighborhood associations. Excuse me, healthy, vibrant, sustainable communities. But really, Mr. Developer, what does that mean? It sounds like gentrification shrouded in a pretty language with good intentions. Many say the road to hell is paved with the same. I wonder, what kind of forklift is required to raise our souls from this muck and mire? Or what kind of fire must burn to purge our hearts of the heaviness that comes with holding a hope so heavy it hurts?
So that was just what we call a base layer video, which as a user of the site, you can feel free to watch straight through as you would any other online video. But as you notice, these different triggers pop up along the way, and at any point as a user, you can decide to go down any of these avenues that come up. And they're multimedia, so some of them are articles, such as should bus tours be allowed in the Lower Ninth Ward. But just to give you a sense of the site, let's go deeper into seeing Sunny reminisce about her childhood home.
This was our home.
First, we're gonna let it load for a minute.
To my aunt's house, which was in another yard, and then where this concrete slab is, this was a sweet shop that my family owned. This is neighbors over here with Serena and all of her people, and my cousin lived here for years. My other cousins live across the street. You don't just move around here, you know what I mean? If you live here now, you've been living here. Your people been living here, you know, like in my case, my grandmother who grew up here, my, great-grandfather, great-grandmother, and come up in these same houses that I lived in. Half of these houses I know for personally, my grandmother, these houses are in your great-grandfather's name. It's not a transference, so okay, let's put this in your name now, you know what I mean? My grandmother right now, 84 years old, and the house might still be in her, her name, so we'll ask for grandmother, what we gonna do with the lot? I don't feel like dealing with that right now, as so many people have been. And then what happens, the city sees the property, before you know it, we got something here that we have no idea, like, damn, what you mean, I don't even know what could pop up back here, but this was,
Did you want to say more, Luisa, about New Orleans before we move on to the next one?
So I think the sort of trajectory of the project has been very much rooted in New Orleans and sort of what the story of post-Katrina New Orleans brought up for us in a very sort of unprecedented and rather intense way that we can learn in other communities and that is going on in other communities. So, both in the trailer and this piece, you can see that some of the issues that we deal with are gentrification, displacement, issues surrounding affordable housing, economic development, all those tensions that are shaping cities and communities across the country. And so the way that the site is organized, the way that the information has been curated, keeps very much in mind the themes and questions that we're trying to draw out in common in the communities that we're working in. So that said, the next story we're going to dive into is the hometown story of My Brooklyn. Who has seen My Brooklyn here? Great. So we've been working with Kelly Anderson and Allison Dean, the director and producer of My Brooklyn. They took a scene from the film, they opened it up, which is sort of a process that we've had, depending on the filmmaker and on the project, we've had kind of different creative processes, but what they did is they took a scene from the film and actually opened it up and added footage to allow it to breathe a little bit and created some branch off points of places that they wanted to go in deeper. So we're going to take you through that piece and talk a little bit more about the site that way.
They steam clean the bank bill. It looks like it. Yeah. You know what? And if they would have took this down, I would have fell out. I'd have fell. Kelly, I would have fell out if they would have took this bank down. I was like, come on. Or made it a gym. You know what I mean? You see how many people have moved out of here, though, Kelly? You see how all the stores are gone now? A lot of the stores are no longer here. You have more of the brand name stores that are going up now. The smaller merchants, they don't stand a chance down here now. The commercialism was for people. Now the commercialism is not for people anymore. It's going corporate now. People used to come and meet downtown. We still have the original name of streets, but we don't have the stores. You can't come downtown to really buy the things that you really want because the conversion that's taking place for the shoppers now, those stores are going out. They're going out. They're going out into the outskirts of communities now. Downtown is not the place where you would say this is a rich shopping area. Rich meaning in merchants and in goods. We have the Sheraton.
So I'll stop there. But again, watching along, we have a number of different multimedia pieces that the user can look at based on your interest, including this report by Families United for Racial and Economic Equality. So this is just an example of how we've taken a lot of different partnerships and collaborations to get work by different advocates and researchers and other filmmakers all together in one piece to create a more rich experience. Here's a newspaper article, and let's go deeper to looking at downtown Brooklyn in 2004.
I've been downtown Brooklyn all my life. Brooklyn's the best city in the world. Stores, the food, the atmosphere, everything, you know? It's not a boring place at all. If it's one place you gotta visit in the world, visit Brooklyn.
Downtown Brooklyn Fulton Mall is the same as all the other strong community areas like Jamaica Avenue, 125th Street. It caters to the African American Caribbean community because you have now Caribbean bookstores, you have African American bookstores, you have record stores down here, places to get your hair braided at, and art and nail designs. A lot of stuff comes just out of this community that goes out into the rest of the world.
So yeah, and again from here it goes deeper. So some of these pieces go 4 layers deep, and also often connect to other locations. So a lot of New Orleans content you can find through something that initially is about downtown Brooklyn, or a piece that starts in Chicago and the redevelopment of the Cabrini Green housing development. Then suddenly you're watching something about Detroit and seeing similarities there. And we've also found it really useful, as in this case, to show change over time, not just geography. So it's one thing to see what Brooklyn looks like in downtown Brooklyn in 2013, but then to actually be able to see it in 2004 and see some of the businesses that are there no longer there, just adds a layer of depth, we think.
And both of these pieces that we just showed, but especially My Brooklyn, is an example of the kinds of collaborations that we've been doing. So all of these layered pieces, rather than being produced by just one filmmaker or one author, are an active collaboration between a media maker, some sort of educator, researcher, or advocacy partner, and sometimes all three. So like, for example, in Chicago, we're working with filmmaker Ronit Bezalel, who's been tracing the redevelopment of the Cabrini Green projects for over 10 years. We're also working with an educator at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and between the three of us, and then we're bringing in our New Orleans content, between the three of us, we're creating this sort of multi-layered story world that looks at public housing redevelopment over longer than a decade in these two communities, and brings in scholarly research, journalism, and we're also actually working with a journalist in New Orleans who's been covering public housing redevelopment in New Orleans. So it brings in scholarly research, journalism, and multimedia storytelling. So we've been thinking about, this is all born again of kind of the on-the-ground experience of taking an unprecedented moment in our story's history and doing sort of really comprehensive storytelling around it, and really tracing hundreds of stories and hundreds of points of view, a real multiplicity of points of view, from folks who have power, from folks who don't, from folks who are fighting to bring their communities back, from folks who are fighting to maintain the status quo, and really figuring out ways to create a dialogue between these different perspectives in a more holistic way that isn't, again, just that kind of forced linearity of, I think I might just have made up that word, in sort of a feature film or even short doc content. This idea of sort of vertically structuring these stories has been a very challenging one for all of us. And actually, I think Rachel and Michael might talk a little bit more about that later in our collaboration with Sandy's Storyline, because Rachel's kind of in the thick of it right now of trying to create some of these stories. But even in our scripting process, it takes like anywhere between 5 to 7 people to sort of work on one script together and each sort of contribute their piece of the pie, and then figure out how all the pieces fit together. Because you start with your base layer and you have your branch off points, and then you figure out what you're going to branch off into, and then this idea that sort of the layers are kind of infinite, and you're starting to stack stuff vertically. And you no longer feel the pressure of, I have to put, an interview next to B-roll, next to another interview, and sort of have everything work seamlessly in a horizontal way. And then worry about what's been left out, and sort of have that be the eternal kind of these story threads that could have worked really well and kind of had to be sort of squeezed out. And we're working with filmmakers in a variety of different situations, some of whom have already released films out into the world, as is the case with Kelly, and who have these really rich archives, as we do, and who are culling from their archives to kind of weave the content in, again, in this sort of multi-layered way. And we're also working with filmmakers who actually have only been producing short content and don't have plans to make a feature film, and who are even in the midst of an editing process and figuring out actually through the process of making these interactive videos, if they're even going to make kind of more traditionally linear films. So we've sort of run the gamut of experiences with our partners. One of the sort of partnership and user types that we've been thinking a lot about and that we've been piloting. We've been piloting each type. We've been starting really small. So we released the beta in mid-November, and the platform is still in beta. And we'll talk a little bit more of some of the challenges around that and where we sort of still have to go from a development perspective. But we are piloting sort of types of partnerships to see what works and what doesn't. So we have our educator partners. There are at least half a dozen educators at the university level across the country who are incorporating the platform into their curricula. And that works in different ways. They're either having students create content on the platform or having students explore content on the platform and make connections and explain why they're making connections and what their journeys were. And then we actually have a partnership with a youth media organization in San Francisco that's looking at gentrification in the Tenderloin district and actually bringing the platform into their curriculum and having students script stories from the get-go native to the platform. So actually thinking about vertical storytelling from the get-go, and they'll be creating these narratives about the Tenderloin and drawing parallels to New Orleans. Another type of partnership that we have is with the New Orleans Coalition for Open Governance that is trying to bring participatory budgeting to New Orleans. Who doesn't know what participatory budgeting is? Jay, do you want to tell everyone what participatory budgeting is? This is our partner in the video, Jay Sternberg from Meerkat. Tell us what participatory budgeting is.
Sure. Well, it's a kind of participatory democracy that allows people in communities to help decide how to spend their public budget. So in New York City this year, that's the 3rd year that New York's been trying it, and it's in 10 different districts right now in New York. And in each of those districts, there's a community assembly process through which people are deciding how to spend about $1 million in each district of the public money. And next year, it's going to be in 22 districts in New York. It's really expanding. So our collective, Meerkat Media, made a short that is, and we're partnering with Luisa on this project.
So in New Orleans, the New Orleans Coalition for Open Governance is a coalition of different organizations that are trying to bring participatory budgeting to New Orleans. And so they're obviously looking for success stories in other communities where participatory budgeting has been implemented, and we started talking with them before the platform was released in sort of the inception stages, and thought it would be a great sort of pilot reference model of taking a story of a community where something has been successfully implemented and using the lessons learned to sort of translate that story to another context and to raise awareness and engagement and sort of get the effort going. So what we did is we took the amazing Meerkat video that really highlights the story of New York. NOCOG went around and gathered testimonials from communities in New Orleans and people sort of saying what they would do if participatory budgeting came to New Orleans and what their projects would be, and then started to overlay data and information about participatory budgeting efforts in other cities and communities across America, because there's the National Participatory Budgeting Project. And so NOCOG has been using the video to raise awareness, engagement, and as the effort sort of begins to get underway in New Orleans. So we're going to just go through a little bit of that in the video now and show you how that's been working.
Right, if you live in this community and you pay taxes, come out and vote, decide how your tax dollars get spent.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make the decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide how to spend part of the public budget.
Oh, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to be spent instead of allowing them to decide where to spend money. Who knows better about their community than the people that live in their community?
So how does it work? First, people brainstorm ideas. They come together in neighborhood assemblies and start to think of what kinds of projects would they like to see in their neighborhood. Volunteers take people's initial ideas and turn them into real projects.
We started with maybe about 40 projects, and so we had a series of budget delegate meetings, and we narrowed down the list into about 4 or 5 projects.
What are the real needs of the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible?
We're asking for a projector and 30 Mac laptops.
Displays at bus shelters throughout the district, and it will tell people when the next bus is due to arrive.
I'm dreaming of new benches, modern benches. Seniors have nowhere to go.
People get a taste of making the tough decisions and coming up with things that can be done to improve their community, and they bring them back to the public for a vote.
Are you guys really itching to see the rest of this? Or if you were using it, would you keep watching, or would you see what New Orleanians want? Okay, sorry, Meerkat, for cutting you off. We're going to New Orleans. We're going to see New Orleanians describe their dream projects.
If I could present one project to the mayor that PB could fund, it would be internet readiness and access in all public schools.
Well, one dream project for me, I think, would be to increase the retail marketing in my area.
Creativity media centers. For youth and adults, not just for one or the other.
More programs to help the youth of the city.
School funding, the repairs of our streets, and I would like to have a voice in the city budget as to direct the money to fixing those streets.
And so this trigger, for example, is going to lead to a submission form that community members fill out at these sort of town hall events that NOCOG has been sponsoring, and then they're going to gather that data and start, sort of being able to identify, kind of to be able to talk about in their engagement campaign what people are clamoring for in New Orleans. And so this is an example also of a, sorry, I really don't like the microphone. An example of a partnership where the partner was given the login and learned, you know, with very little training, because the whole idea is that the site and the back end are supposed to be pretty intuitive and easy to use, went ahead and created their own rich media video without really us holding their hand in gatekeeping. So, you know, they figured out what was most useful for them and for their engagement campaign. And one of the things that we've been talking a lot about in that partnership and that we've been thinking a lot about is the idea that, you know, a huge component of advocacy is knowledge building and deepening knowledge about a particular issue, rather than just asking people to click on things or, you know, sign petitions or take very sort of specific actions, which are also incredibly important. I don't know that this is the right tool for that per se, just because I don't know that what we're trying to do is I don't know that we'll ever encourage the type of like sort of millions of eyeballs traffic that builds the kind of volume for something like signing a petition and having that kind of volume of power. But what we are trying to do is deepen engagement. So even like when we talk about metrics, which we can talk about a little bit later, what we're really looking at is time spent on the site, rather than just number of eyeballs that traffic through. And so with some of the other partners that we've been talking to about collaborating and partnering on engagement campaigns, it's really been about that question of, are we building sort of a knowledge base and deepening knowledge about a particular issue, especially with this ability to sort of toggle between the personal storytelling and the data and the larger kind of research and issue framework. If that makes sense, and we can talk more about it if there are questions around that. I think we are ready. So we're going to segue into talking about, well, actually, I think what we should do is just like quickly, we can talk about the categories just for a second. So one other big thing that kind of is, we've structured the site around, you know, it's that sort of parallax design that everyone is moving towards these days of a single scroll. But we've organized the site into these kind of looser, more thematic categories and tried to stay away from sort of like single issue topics like housing and healthcare and education. We've tried to create more elastic categories that are based on these sort of notions of the dichotomy of the two sort of ends of the spectrum. So displacement home, devastation rebuilding, exclusion engagement, I just didn't know which one was next. Exclusion engagement, and the last category that we're actually going to be rolling out next week, which is community commodity. And that's the way the site is organized. So it's sort of, it's encouraging folks to make connections along the sort of spectrum of stories that are being presented within a particular category, and then also make connections within the piece itself. And then the last part of the site that we are debuting soon, and we're going to give you guys a sneak preview of today, is the Katrina-Sandy comparative thematic timeline that we hinted at in the trailer. And our incredible partners, Sandy Storyline, who are here tonight, are going to talk a little bit about that. And it's really about taking the story of Katrina and the lessons learned and applying that to Sandy and making connections between those two situations in a very story-driven way, and again, using this tool to bring in the other sort of world of information around that. So I'm going to pull it up.
Sure. You want the time?
Yeah, it's fine. Cool. And Rachel and Michael, coming up, Rachel.
Hi everybody, how you doing? So my name is Rachel Falcone, and I am part of a project called Sandy Storyline. And we started it actually the week of the storm. I've been doing storytelling with Michael here around the housing crisis for about 5 years. And when Sandy hit, having sort of relationships with folks nationally, and particularly Luisa in New Orleans, Michael had spent time in New Orleans after Katrina, we knew what was coming ahead of us, right? This multi-year rebuilding process, where we're going to have to deal with questions around use of land, displacement, rebuilding. And so we started a project to really create a space for people to share their own stories, and wanted people's voices to be part of that vision and rebuilding. So using some of the technology that we have at our fingertips and that's growing and developing, we built a platform where people can share their own story, invite anybody to share photographs, written testimony, video, audio from the storm. And folks can even text in photographs that they have on their cell phone, or call a phone line and leave a message to create an audio story. And so the site has hundreds of stories that people have submitted, both citizen and professional journalists, as well as residents themselves, submitting their stories and testimonies. And so we met Luisa in New Orleans several years ago at the Pasqua Film Festival. And Luisa's like one of the only feature filmmakers that I know that actually gets transmedia production and multimedia. So I've been producing mostly audio and oral history stories and sort of pairing that with still photography. Michael's a photographer. And for a long time, we've been trying to think about how can longer video pieces really go with audio. And one of the first events that Luisa and we collaborated on was an event at the Breck Forum where she played her feature film, but we actually started the piece, and actually I think we did it at the Patois too, where we started the piece by dimming the lights, totally making it dark, and playing audio to sort of get people into the space of listening. And sort of really thinking about how do we pair different types of multimedia with video. And so we were really excited because Luisa was in the process of building this platform at this very same time that we started Sandy Storyline, and thought, wouldn't it be incredible to try to think about sharing content side by side and really digging in together and thinking about the lessons learned. We knew particularly, Mike and I from our work in housing, how important the public housing piece is in terms of the loss of public housing in New Orleans and how we want to communicate what that meant to folks that are dealing with Sandy. And so we have different, actually if you want to pull up the, so we're still building the different pieces and particularly the rich media sections. But we thought about how do we compare this? So Luisa had built a platform where we could toggle between Sandy and Katrina. And we were very much, the first thought was like, can we do a literal timeline, or what would that look like? And we thought that it wasn't necessarily possible a lot because right after Katrina, some things took a year that happened much more quickly after Sandy, and so the timelines don't necessarily line up perfectly. But what does is really the phases of what happens after a storm. And I know a couple months after the storm, I kind of didn't really believe Luisa when she was like, these are the phases that happen, and I was just so into what we were doing. And now, that we're now 15, 16 months after, you see these are the major phases, right? So you have the storm itself, the experience people had, a lot of traumatic experiences people had experiencing the storm, surviving it, helping their neighbors. You have the immediate aftermath of the weeks, which is usually chaos, where folks are scrambling to try to help each other. And then you have sort of the longer term aftermath, where we have pieces that kind of feature people living without power for many months, without heat. Particularly we were dealing with in Sandy, and then there's a story here about a man that sort of stayed and why people particularly might stay in their neighborhoods or feel like they don't have a place to go beyond that, and why they might live in those conditions. We also are looking at recovery, rebuilding, and we talked a lot about sort of how those two might go together as opposed to sort of being separate. We talked about should they be separate phases, but it feels like a lot of different things you might call recovery, you might call rebuilding, and so we wanted to create a sort of phase that looked at that together. And so some of what we're looking at is sort of what homeowners in New Jersey, we compare a homeowner to someone in New Orleans, and sort of looking at the bureaucratic mess and sort of how it's different and similar in terms of people trying to get funding to rebuild. And we're also really looking at future, and what's just so interesting is that Luisa has 8 years of footage, right? And we're a really new project. We have a lot of stories, but there's lessons that we can learn from Katrina that just haven't happened yet. We're in a much earlier phase post-Sandy, and so creating the opportunity to sort of share other content that they have and experiences that we haven't really gotten to that we might learn from their mistakes so that we don't repeat the same ones. Another thing that's really exciting is the opportunity to share sort of calls to action. And so for us, we're really inviting stories ongoing. And so we want to include opportunities for people to look at content, but also be invited to share their own stories. And so we're going to be including calls to action that link back to our site and our contributor form so that it's easy for people to add content themselves. That's one difference of our projects, where sort of Luisa is working with solid partners to develop content, and we sort of are much more open in the tools, so we're inviting anybody to share. Is there anything else?
Just are there like
Oh, yeah. So I'm in the thick of spreadsheets. Luisa has like a whole system of how she develops, and we develop all these triggers, right? And think about and script them, and it's hard. I think we have short content, first person mostly, and so trying to think about how to use B-roll or how to use things to open up space so that we can script in other moments, and also just thinking about all the questions. I think we're really beginning our data collection and research phase, and so we're starting to try to pull different folks that have been pulling that information and data, but some of the data doesn't exist yet. And so we're trying to think about how do we answer the questions we can answer that people have after Sandy, and also how do we really share kind of nuanced stories and content, but also provide enough information that there's a comparison that people come away with, where they've learned something about it, but they did it in a nonlinear way where we weren't saying this is what happened in Katrina and this is what happened in Sandy and this is what you should think about it. You're getting to see the story of a young man talking about what it was like to survive out of his house in Katrina, and you're hearing a similar story from a young woman in New York, and then maybe we're trying to give you the opportunity to look at different triggers and go different paths to start to answer some of those questions with other content. So, yeah.
And speaking of lessons learned, I think this sort of brings us to our final kind of point or moment, is around some of the challenges that we've been facing, and I think hopefully some of that will also come up in the Q&A. How many people here sort of self-identify as more kind of, I would say, traditional filmmakers who don't do a lot of transmedia stuff? Okay. Oh, and the rest of you have been deeply immersed in transmedia and digital media. That's great. Okay. Well, I am firmly in the camp of someone who has had a massive learning curve, sort of transitioning from more linear or traditional modes of filmmaking to operating in this space, and it has been incredible. And I think one of the sort of biggest challenges and opportunities is in the sort of technologist filmmaker relationship. And it is really interesting because there's a lot of sort of power in that relationship. You know, I don't write code, I don't know how to read code, and that's sort of the first time in my career that I've not been able to kind of get under the hood of what I was asking to be created, and not even really be able to sort of evaluate from my own kind of understanding of the kind of nuts and bolts or the guts of the thing, you know, if what I was asking would take 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days or cost $5 or $5,000, and that's a really interesting space to be in, you know, especially when you've been working for 2 decades. And so that definitely is something I think that, you know, we've got a ways to go in creating kind of common language between filmmakers and technologists. I think it is still a little bit the Wild West in the sense that the technologists are the only people who sort of still get paid $150 an hour, to do anything in this world, I think, but certainly to, you know, definitely have a lot of power. You know, knowledge is power. So I think it's been an interesting ride. And again, I certainly know a lot more than I did sort of starting. And we're actually working with the Center for Media and Social Impact to kind of document our process a little bit. We've been kind of a guinea pig for a case study that talks a lot about that, that's sort of geared towards filmmakers that are beginning to work in this space. And I think another thing that, you know, that speaks to, from a resource perspective, I think the sort of what it takes to kind of build something like this, but then maintain it. The sort of long-term sustainability of it. You know, as filmmakers, we're kind of used to this idea of like we put our film out into the world and then you kind of have the distribution and outreach phase, but you know, the thing is done to a certain extent. And actually in some ways, you know, launching something, especially in beta, is only the beginning. You know, there's this sort of the sustainability and care and feeding of a project like this, and especially something like this that involves such a high level of collaboration, has been, you know, fairly labor and resource intensive, and I think that that's something, a challenge that a lot of projects are finding. And actually Ada also works with another amazing project and one of our amazing partners, and she's going to talk a little bit about that, some of the challenges of partnership, and also just challenges of long-term sustainability of projects. She works for this amazing project called Bridge the Gulf. And do you want to talk a little bit about that actually? So I just realized we didn't talk.
Sure. So I came to Land of Opportunity as a project partner with Bridge the Gulf, which is a community media platform for the Gulf Coast. And so we have a lot of blog posts about the BP oil disaster, firsthand stories from fishermen, people who become ill after the spill, and a number of different environmental and social justice issues. And so this site was a really great opportunity to weave together some of those stories, both across geography, because we work with people who are in Texas and people who are in Alabama and across the region, and also there's the BP oil disaster, and then there's the ongoing issues of having asthma or cancer from living next to an oil refinery. So it's really hard to weave all of those stories together succinctly, and this tool was an exciting way to make it happen. In terms of challenges, I also now work with Luisa on the project, so I know a little bit more of the challenges. One of the things is because it's this new technology, it's not accessible in certain ways. So it only works with high-speed internet connection on the latest version of browsers, and that just means a lot of people can't use it, which is true for, I'm sure, lots of our projects in the room. But it's just a reality, and I think also as we talk about funding, the sustainability of projects like this, building the technology doesn't mean the stories are going to get made. So it's helpful to have filmmaker partners who are on their own trying to get funding to make their film, and then if they're willing to share their footage and their work, that's really great. And also it doesn't work that people can just submit their own videos really easily. There still has to be a lot of curating and a lot of supporting community media projects to get some of these great stories out there. And a few people have just straight up been confused about the questions, what are the scrolling, or how do I find this story? So I think it's sort of finding that line where what is cool, where is the technology pushing us in a good way, and also what are some of the trade-offs of that. A lot of it is just you're funding the technology to be built, and that means you're not necessarily funding the storytellers or yourself, or So those are some brief challenges and lessons learned regarding trying to do work that is grounded in community and also that requires a lot of technology costs. I think that was the main thing I was going to say. Questions? Should we open up for questions?
I have one.
Yes, Mike.
So the triggers, right? Did you guys figure out what was the average, what was the most that people would interact with over the course of one of the things we're always trying to figure out is how much interactivity do you put into the experience without it kind of being overwhelming.
Right.
And so I was just curious, if you guys have figured out what that magic number is, or is it really specific to the clip and to the story and to the content of it?
Well, I would say we haven't dug super deep into our metrics. We're using Google Analytics, and we see which of the rich media videos have the highest number of views, and we track where that came from. And we haven't taken a very deep look at the sort of third and fourth layer triggers. I mean, in general, those are being looked at way less. But we haven't gotten super deep into understanding from looking at metrics how many clicks on average. But it's definitely something that we would like to track. Really, the way we're doing it now, the main way that Luisa mentioned that we're piloting this is through educators in classrooms, and so we have a survey for the educators and their students to give us qualitative feedback on is this actually useful for your learning, and feedback to improve it.
And then I would say the other thing about that is too just time spent in a particular video. So what we have been tracking is like if people have been spending a certain amount of time, which to us means that they've been exploring the triggers. It is tricky because it's like we can't track non-video quite as easy. You know, like if a PDF pops up, it's really hard to be able to track if someone was on that or access that or not. So that's what we actually, the metrics have been a challenge. We have to kind of figure out the best way to do that. The other thing I would say is, yeah, as Ada mentioned, the educator partners are designing different ways, and actually Evan, who just can't ever leave this project, is helping us design a curriculum that it sort of suggests paths, but also brings in ways, you know, helps people sort of construct how they're assigning the platform. But that's been very much kind of the gist of some of the assignments have been, you know, access X number of triggers, go X number of layers deep, explain why you did that and what dots you connected through that. So I think, you know, that dance between hyper throwing too much at people and not enough is what we're trying to figure out now as part of the experiment, because it can definitely be too much. And then, you know, of course, the other tension is like with partners who want to kind of throw the kitchen sink at it. One question is, you know, you want to stockpile content that you can constantly be refreshing stuff and trading stuff out. So that is, you know, that's definitely something we're taking a look at. Yeah.
I guess it's kind of a related question, but do you find it difficult to decide what content to put into sort of the backbone of the story arc versus, you know, balancing that with wanting some rich content as sort of the add-on to content and what to put where, and so that you come out with a powerful story, but you still have rich content to enhance that.
Yeah, and that sort of goes back to the sort of vertical storytelling thing, and it's definitely been pushing my creative buttons in a really interesting way, because I really am used to this idea of like the primacy of that like sort of first layer of text, and I've had to be reminded, including by Kelly, our filmmaker partner. At one point, she had this really interesting moment in the base layer where, like, you know, she actually left the street scene and went to a developer talking about something. And then she actually decided to take that out and put the developer in the second layer. And I was like, Kelly, but it was so interesting. She's like, hi, you built this tool so that I could take the developer out of the first layer, put him in the second layer, and stay in this scene, which is what I wanted to do. I didn't want to leave this space, and you're giving me the freedom not to do that. So, you know, get off my back. And I was like, oh, right, that's why I did this. So, you know, it's been hard for me sometimes to kind of, and collectively for all of us, like we're kind of tearing our hair out sometimes, because it's almost like an embarrassment of riches sometimes to make these sort of crucial decisions. But it's also about thinking about how the pressure isn't just on like putting all of your eggs in that one basket, and you're hoping that people are going to go down the rabbit hole with you, and some of that content that would have been forced into that first layer is now being put in other places, and actually really freeing up the storytelling to a certain extent. But it's challenging. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the tool, A, and then B, is there a mobile experience with this, and how does that work?
So right now it's not like mobile like phone enabled, it's tablet enabled. The smaller you get with this experience, the more challenging it is, because there's a lot of moving pieces, even just from the sort of graphic perspective. And that's, again, another challenge, like, you know, long-term vision for the project is definitely to be mobile enabled, because that's the way everyone's going, and that's the way a lot of communities get their media. So that's definitely something that we're hoping to be able to achieve long-term, and especially around capturing content too. Like, you know, as phase 2 of the project, there was definitely a thought to figuring out how we would do user-generated content. And again, in a sort of more curated way, which is a huge challenge. But and in terms of when you say talk about the tool, do you mean like how people are using the platform itself, or like
the platform itself, a little bit.
Right. So
itself, and if other people are using it, like maybe not you, maybe in different ways.
Right. Well, again, we're sort of piloting small and figuring out different ways that people or different opportunities for people to use this, and hopefully things that we hadn't even thought of. So right now, the people who are piloting it are educators, youth media folks, a couple of advocacy folks who are doing kind of engagement and awareness campaigns, and yeah, I mean that's sort of like it's a specialized targeted group. Like I don't really envision a scenario again where this is going to be sort of millions of eyeballs of people who like watch cat videos on the internet and spend 30 seconds in an experience and jump out. Like this has always been envisioned as targeted to people who are invested in kind of the sort of urban equity or community redevelopment space and sort of work in that in one fashion or another.
But do you see this as like maybe a whole other different opportunity, maybe a totally different subject using the platform?
Well, yes. So in the long-term conception, so it's open source in the most literal. So another huge lesson for me has been what open source truly means. And what that, and I've stopped bandying that term about because I'm realizing that it's kind of offensive if it's only name only. And so right now, quite truthfully, honestly, this platform is open source and name only. Like it's up on GitHub and you can go and try and decipher it, good luck. Like you need developer help and it'll cost you thousands of dollars. So that was a rude awakening because, you know, I had sort of in my own lay ignorance understood that, you know, if the code was available, great. You know, but it's not the case. And unfortunately, because of the sort of lack of resources we had, it is tightly intertwined. It's Drupal and Popcorn. You know, it's highly hacked and customized open source components, which everyone is familiar with doing. But the issue is that it's tightly intertwined with our content right now. It's themed in Drupal terms with our content. So it would take someone the time to learn how it's operating to be able to then skin it themselves and do what they need to do with it. The ultimate goal and the ultimate dream is absolutely to build something that's extractable, that someone could do a timeline comparing and contrasting any two issues and events if they wanted to, because you know all of this stuff is embeddable. So you can take an RMV and you can embed it on your site and never come to our site. It updates by itself, you access the content, great. Timeline, same thing. So eventually, the idea is you could absolutely take this and apply this to any number of situations and stories, but we're not there yet and would require heavy lifting on the resource end to get there. Yeah?
Can you speak in some detail or maybe even hold up an example of the elaborate spreadsheet system?
Yeah.
Which should we see one?
Should we do one of the Sandy storyline? Evan's gonna have a nervous breakdown.
I'm worried for you.
Which one should we show? That's less like
Can I unplug? Hey Mike, if I unplug this, can I unplug it and plug it back in?
Should we show Sunny? Or should we do one of those in the storyline?
Yeah, I think the ones that are, you know,
like Sunny.
Done for a while.
Okay.
It may even be worthwhile one that's got fewer triggers than not right returns.
That's what I mean, Sunny has fewer, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah, so basically our system right now is we've got a lot of people kind of working part-time and each contributing a little piece. And so like our operating system, and our whole universe is Google, like Google Docs, everything, Google Hangout, everything. Like I just live in a world of Google information and spying all day long. And we devised this spreadsheet system so that we could all kind of be on the same page, and then the person there's only really 2 or 3 people who actually are loading content onto the site, and so the spreadsheet becomes the way that they do that and the roadmap for everyone. And the spreadsheet's designed to show the relationship between the different pieces of content, which is why it can be kind of overwhelming. But then this partner of ours in San Francisco, I was shocked, he actually managed to take this system and make it even more complex. And he actually created like what he called a vertical storytelling matrix to present to his like 8th grade students. And I was like, I don't even understand this, I don't know how this is gonna work. But apparently it's working.
I don't know. There we go.
So yeah, I mean the relationship between, you know, it kind of builds out this way. So this is layer 1, and the time code references this piece of media over here. And then we have all our different content types.
Top to bottom, layer 1.
So this is the base layer, right, exactly. These are the different time codes. So yeah, top to bottom. And then this is so layer 2, although we call base layer layer 0. So layer 1 is the additional layer of content. And so you see we have all different kinds of content. There's a Vimeo, so all of our stuff is hosted on YouTube or Vimeo. So there's video, there's a Google map, there's a PDF somewhere. And then, you know, we have the citation, we have the title of the piece, the what, which is sort of the short description, all the tags. So one of the challenges around this kind of really open-ended taxonomy of these sort of categories that are really elastic is that we really have to rely on search for people who are getting very targeted about what they're looking for. And it's an immersive search, the way that Google is, so you start typing and search terms come up. But sometimes people don't necessarily know that, so that's interesting.
So in your parlance, it's a layer, layers and sequentially using the timeline of the base.
So it's vertical, so it's like base layer, then layer, the little triggers that show up or that are the layer 1 on that base layer, and then when you go into a trigger, you can then go into access. I mean, it's infinite layers essentially, so we're building things on top of each other.
Right.
Do you want to show how that
those triggers that appear at the bottom of the base layer?
Right, exactly. And so then this becomes the base layer for the next section of content, and so on.
And those triggers that appear, those triggers are tied to what is in effect a sequential timeline.
Yes,
right?
it's all, yes.
Okay, so each of those triggers are layers 1 for the past.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions?
I'm just contemplating.
Zone out it for a while.
What do the colors mean?
Well, this isn't very helpful because green usually means that everything's been loaded and everything's fine. Orange means the video's still being edited. Red means something's messed up. Take a look at it, fix it.
So that tool's also being used as a project management.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So pull the data off of the spreadsheet, put it into
So the person who does content management plugs all these things into the CMS that has the fields that correspond to these fields in the spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet definitely correlates directly with the CMS.
How many users are regularly interacting with this?
So it's a lot our team, and then we have you guys, Kelly, Jason. We have like 6 totally independent users who are working with it right now.
And do you take advantage of other sort of like little functionality, like automated notifications and such?
No, we've continued to be in this kind of prehistoric Google mode for the moment.
So you guys are visiting this spreadsheet, like you get to the office or you go out of that or whatever, and you have this open.
Yeah.
What's changed?
Yeah.
what are you using for the search?
Do you mean what we use to build the search?
What technology is actually doing the search?
It's a good question. That's a question for my developer.
Does it look familiar to you?
No, it's just what you just mentioned. It works like it brings stuff up sometimes. Curious what's actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, we input the tags and then, but I don't know what it was built on. Good question.
What is your motivation for doing this project? Your personal motivation, your financial motivation, and the motivation of people who are funding it. Who is it that
So my personal motivation is very tied to kind of my experience on the sort of overall Land of Opportunity project and kind of what I found in my journey through it, and the desire to kind of take the stories that I was seeing and connect them to a larger context and a larger story world, and really find the similarities and connections between the different communities that I was taking a look at. Financial motivation is 0 and deplorable, actually, and can no longer continue this way. So the Ford Foundation provided most of the bulk of the funding for this. And it wasn't the Just Films communications side of it, it was the Metropolitan Opportunity side, and their work is actually very much this. It's about community rebuilding and community development work in 12 cities across the country. And so a lot of what they do is connect the stories and issues and themes and situations and groups that are working on the ground in different cities. And so this was a kind of an experiment and a gamble for them to sort of begin to think about how to use media to support some of the work that they're doing.
You're a filmmaker and films eventually end.
Eventually. around in a log cabin for a good long
But
time.
I mean, honestly, you built this thing and it seems like it wants to live, you know, but it needs support and you can't support it for the rest of your life. So what is the dream, not even the plan, what's the prayer here? I mean, in terms of where it's going to live and how it's going to function in the world when you get to go, like, and make a movie, retire.
Yes, I contemplate this often. So actually, Ada and Bridge the Gulf were a great example. So Bridge the Gulf is a project.
You're deflecting.
Well, no, I'm giving specifics. Hold on. So Bridge the Gulf is a project that was actually, it's the opposite. The website, the platform came before the feature film. So Ada works very closely with a filmmaker named Luisa McMahon, who just actually released her film that she spent 14 years working on. But the site that sort of was spawned by the film, Ada was brought in to run that, you know, and Leah is still involved, but not, you know, as much in the sort of day-to-day operation of it. So for this to continue, and in general, the thought always was that someone would have to come in and sort of take over the day-to-day operation of it. And that also that our partners would become self-sufficient enough that it doesn't require the sort of level of hand-held holding that it's been to just in the beginning, of course. But I would be very happy to continue to be sort of a vision person, but I can't continue sort of running day to day. And it's a different beast. It's a completely different animal. I mean, I would say not even 50% of the content on the site is Land of Opportunity content. So I've gone from sort of a filmmaker and sort of author and creator to very much a curator and collector of other people's content, which is a hugely, I mean, been an immensely enjoyable experience that I didn't anticipate, but it is a very different role. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of room for this to be taken in many directions by someone else, if you know, if we're talking dream, you know, and sort of long-term plan. Yes.
One more question. I have a question about the technology. Can you talk a little bit about how you found your development partner? You have a spec, you iterate, and also what percentage of your budget pays the developer? Kind of alluded to the fact.
Huge.
So they take most of the cost. Are they on, and also are they on site? How do you work with them?
So our amazing development design firm and team is Uncharted Digital, based in Los Angeles, and John Vidar is the founder and principal of that company. We actually, this has been a very iterative process. We had a demo like 2 years ago that is completely unrecognizable. Like I actually cringe when I look at it. Like it really had like the core sort of functionality, but that was no design and just nothing really. And we've definitely iterated from that. I mean, we went from that to, we actually had the great fortune of being at Baybex Producers Institute in 2012, which was a great way to kind of spend a week basically getting to a place where we had a paper prototype and doing use case scenarios and just going through the whole, you know, the pre-discovery process essentially. And then we created an RFP with an amazing consultant, Heidi Boisvert, who works at Future Perfect here in New York, is a company called Future Perfect, and she came down to New Orleans for 3 days. And the other great thing about being based in New Orleans is like, who doesn't want to come down to New Orleans and work with us? So it's a huge incentive. So she came down and we just spent 3 days like immersed in every possible, you know, and working with our partners too. Like we've worked with educators and advocates sort of from day one to help shape the vision of the project. And then after that process, we created a pretty detailed RFP. And then John, you know, started working with John. He came down to New Orleans for discovery, and then we've been working remotely ever since. Again, in like the Google universe. But so he's not, you know, we're done with this initial phase of the project. The beta is out, and you know, we're sort of hoping to gather resources to keep on working on it. But he's done with this phase, and then, you know, we've scoped out future phases that involve refining the project further and actually going further in the open source side of things, becoming truly open source. But, yeah. And yeah, I mean, yes, a huge part of the budget went to that because, you know, we've cobbled together this group of like super part-time people, including students and graduate students, and, you know, I've never drawn a penny from it, you know, like it's just, that's the only sort of part of the labor that can't be, yeah, can't be sweat equity, you know, so so obviously those are sort of the big part of the hard costs.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm Stephen Bradley with Author B, and I'm a little freaked out because I spent my entire childhood in the middle seat of a 1962 Volkswagen bus, so I feel about 5 years old now. Anyway, it's great to be in front of this crowd because what we're working on would really love to get feedback and input from you guys.
Is that Brian Clark? The quote from Brian Clark?
It is.
OMG.
Is that a bad thing that I do a terrible thing?
No, you've got instant street cred.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I was sitting in the room when he said that, so I didn't steal it from anywhere, but I loved it. So, listen, Author B is all about bringing communities together to tell stories. So it's a great segue. Thank you for doing that setup for my 5 minutes. It's all about community storytelling, collaborative storytelling, allowing people to come together and tell their stories. And there are great examples through time, and you've seen some of them here tonight, of communities actually doing that and telling very, very powerful stories because they can tell them as a community and with a lot more richness than could be told by any one individual. So fundamentally, that's what we're about. And is that thing in there? Or that? Thank you. Technology fails again. So this whole storytelling thing is not lost on brands either. So as you may have noticed the last couple of years, storytelling has been a hot button, a hot buzzword among brands, and it's actually content marketing is a $44 billion business today, all around creating story content, all for the purpose of engaging a community. And in fact, some of the brands that you see here have been exploring to varying levels of success, creating, engaging the communities that they've already put together around creating content too. And that's really what is interesting to us, is instead of all the focus being on the content necessarily, since the engagement in this world is really the end goal, how can we engage the audience to actually help create content to tell the story of the community that's been put together. So with that, our core platform, and we are a platform company, kind of looks like this in a very simplified way. We tell stories, or it allows people to tell stories in small pieces. So it's essentially serialized storytelling. We call each piece a segment of a story. And when anybody can come in and add to the story, they can add to the end of the story, but they can actually add to any point, at any point in the story. And when they do, what happens is, it's not like a Google Doc where you're editing something and then forever it's edited. You're actually just adding your own storyline. So you're branching a story off. You're not touching anything that anybody else has created, it's still there. So what you end up with is a story that has multiple paths through it. It's kind of like choose your own adventure in a way, except that it's interactive and being dynamically created. And what's interesting about this in particular is that anybody coming into the story can then define the story for themselves. They can have their own personal experience of the story. So they have their own point of view, they have their own social graph, they have their own perspective. They can choose what storyline resonates with them as the individuals that they are, and if they don't find it, they can create it for themselves. So our focus, and we've had this platform out in a couple of different applications and environments, and the latest thing that we put out is really pushing the social storytelling aspect, and we put a Twitter front end on the storytelling platform. So you can basically start a story on our platform by simply tweeting. And you can continue the story by replying to your tweet. You can reply to your own tweet, or you can have your followers reply to a tweet to extend the story. And so here's an example of what a story might look like. The initial story would be the first tweet sent out. And then in this particular example, it was a citizen journalist type story. I actually sent it, I saw something crazy going on at the end of on Pier 45 on Christopher Street, took a picture. Because I think I included citizen journalist as a hashtag, which we use as a channel on our platform, New York One picked it up and said, hey, they replied, can we use your photo in the story that we're doing? And someone else actually replied from the boat that was being used as the rescue boat for the person that fell off into the water. So this was sort of a serendipitous creation of a story all through Twitter that ends up on our platform in a presentation format. You'll note that, for example, we pull out things like leading and trailing hashtags and mentions that aren't really part of the content of the tweet. So we put them to the side and create the focus on the actual content and what the story is. And as you move through the story, you'll see at various points, 1 more, 2 more, could be 25 more. That means those are other branches of storyline that go off from that point. And you can navigate them by clicking on the arrows that show up when you hover over that point and sort of swap out storylines. You can even copy and paste elements of a storyline from other places into a storyline that you manufacture yourself from it. So that's essentially how it works. What you end up with is a follower community that turns into a participant community. You end up with, instead of 140 characters of a tweet that has a shelf life of about half a nanosecond, you end up with the ability to create longer form content that actually has lasting value as an asset that multiple people can contribute to and can be retained and featured as an asset for an ongoing amount of time. And so with that, my ask would be, first of all, just try it. It's pretty simple. Just send a tweet, mention AuthorBee in the tweet, and if you also use hashtag StoryCode, your story that you just created by sending the tweet will show up on the StoryCode channel that I created earlier today. And you can go in and see it, and at this URL, that's the channel's URL, and you can play with it. You can go in and open it up and extend the story, and in doing so, you'll actually be tweeting. So the whole web app is a Twitter client. And that said, I would love to talk to any of you that are interested in this. We're looking for people to help us work on some pilots and different types of projects for this. Again, the Twitter implementation is the latest thing we've done. It's not the only thing that we have. We have sort of fan fiction type applications of the same idea. We'd love to talk to you more about anybody who's looking to help us as users or beta users or want to do a project. We're excited to do all sorts of different things with it. So thanks.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Zeke Zelker. Thanks for having me today. It's kind of apropos. I always start off explaining how I got into this whole thing through, I was raised in an amusement park. My family started an amusement park in Allentown, Pennsylvania called Dorney Park, where literally if you grew up like I did, you understand the idea of storyscapes and so forth. So you basically build these environments. Around the environment you have an entertainment and then an entertainment different profit centers. So this has kind of been ingrained in my head since I've been, a baby. So what this is I'm creating this project called Billboard, and it's actually a project that's been evolving over the course of time. We've been working on it for about 2 years now, and we're constantly doing more and more R&D, kind of like testing things, breaking things, fixing things, making new things, and everything else. So what it is it is primarily based around a movie project that we've actually have created this entire story world, where the story is about a radio station, WTYT 960, that's struggling to survive. And by doing so, they host a billboard sitting contest, where 4 people live in a billboard to 1 survives to win a mobile home and $960,000. This is loosely based on a real billboard sitting contest that happened in '82 in my hometown of Allentown. So where we are now is I created the radio station, WTYT 960, which is a virtual radio station where bands from all over the world are submitting music to us. And how the bands actually are playing our playlist is by how much they promote themselves. Not us, but themselves on social media. So what ends up happening is the bands that promote themselves more, they play more on the Listen Lives there, and people can literally listen to music that they've never heard before. And it's a really interesting tool for discovery. And something that's happened, which I wasn't anticipating, which happens a lot with this stuff, is a lot of my producing peers now are actually using this to discover unsigned bands for their own movie soundtracks. Something I was not expecting. So creating the radio station is the first phase. The second phase of it is where we're trying to get contestants in the Great WTYT Billboard City Contest. And how do you become a contestant? We create a video telling us why you'd be a great contestant. And what we're doing is how we're building the profiles is by aggregating social media. You're aggregating various sorts of feeds to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so forth, and that's what makes it a lot more dynamic, and people can share things a lot more. The contestants will actually end up being a way that we're casting the film as well, where we're going to be putting out a voting mechanism where people can vote for their top 10 favorite contestants, and those 10 people will be in the movie in some way. So one thing that actually also happened along this whole thing is we created an immersive play because there's also a web series content part of this as well, where the play is you go see the billboard sitters. It's basically a story about 4 people living on a billboard and the trials and tribulations of such. But what we're encouraging people to do is actually engage the characters via social media. And how they then do that is we then actually start finding trends, and then the actors have to improv scenes based on those trends. And we tested this this past November, and it was really interesting because over 30% of the audience actually engaged the story. We created 2 new scenes. One of them was very funny because one of the actors looked like Bill Murray, and all of a sudden we had these kids show up and they were like, "Hey, are you Bill Murray?" And it was quite funny. And it really, so it's, you also see what I'm looking for in each of these faces too. And so it's really kind of like a very interesting way to get the audience very active in what you're doing. And this is all basically building audience for things to come. So then there's the web series, which is basically about the first 60 days of the Billboard City contest. So this is basically, it's a solar powered feed, where the feed comes on, you see the action on the billboard. People ask me, what is this content like? But I'm sure you can all think about what are certain things that you think about how people survive on a billboard. Okay, and so the story mechanism is the solar power goes on, you see the action, it goes off, and so that leads into the next day and so forth. And we're actually really creating a dynamic community with the social media aspect of it as well, because our DJs on WTYT 960 actually have a very large fan following. I mean, some people know that they're actors, some people don't know they're actors, and so people are really blurring the line between fact and fiction. And it's a really interesting way to also build out the audience base. And so then the movie is actually the easiest part of this. I've been a filmmaker for years now. But the really interesting thing about what we're doing as well is there's a lot of branding opportunities within the story mechanic of what we're doing, because it's a radio station hosted by a Billboard City. I'm sorry, it's a radio station hosting a Billboard City contest. So we've been creating really interesting ways for brands to get involved. Like, there's obviously the product placement, the social media stuff within the play. A day will end and we'll have DJs hand out free stuff and everything else. And then obviously the billboard spaces and everything else. And so that's me. I talk really fast. So thank you. Cool.